little backstory to start us off. My grandma, on my dad's side, has a vacation house built on what we believe to be a burial ground of some sort. My dad has countless stories from his childhood about creepy, paranormal things that happened to him there, as well as at another house he lived in, which was also on a burial ground. When I was around 14, my family and I were invited to stay a few nights at the vacation house. The whole vibe was a little eerie and unsettling, but I didn't think too much of it at first. The room where my 5 siblings and I were going to sleep had 4 bunk beds, 2 on each wall with a small walkway in the middle. There was a window, an empty closet, and a door behind one of the bunk beds. We weren't allowed to go inside the room behind the door, but my older sister, who had visited with my cousin before, told me they had gone inside once. She said it was empty, just darkness and dirt, but they'd heard weird noises coming from within, which sparked their curiosity. Anyway, the downstairs area just felt eerie, and I wasn't excited to sleep down there. That night, I fell asleep pretty quickly, but at around 3 or 4 a.m., I woke up suddenly. My eyes immediately focused on what looked like a tall, black figure with glowing white eyes. It was staring at my older sister. As soon as I realized what I was seeing, the figure seemed to sense that I was awake, and it whipped its head towards me. Sometimes, we see things in the dark that we aren't sure are real, but this felt real. I thought maybe I was having sleep paralysis because I was so terrified that I couldn't move, speak, or even blink. I just lay there, staring at this black aura-like figure, knowing it was staring back at me. When I finally mustered up the courage, I flipped over to face the wall, shut my eyes, and tried to go back to sleep. I told my mom about it the next day and wanted to tell my grandma, but my mom stopped me. I don't know why, but the whole experience really freaked me out. What do you guys think? This happened to my mother when she was in her teens. Her mom had just gotten the family a Ouija board as a gift. She had played with one as a child and thought it was interesting and fun. It was a Sunday evening when this took place. My mom's best friend came over to her house, and her older sister's friend was also there. The 4 of them were sitting around the dining room table, playing with the Ouija board and asking it various questions. Who will I marry? What will my husband look like? What kind of job will I have? And so on. The answers started becoming erratic. 1 or more of them began to suspect that someone might be trying to influence the board. All hands went still on the planchette. 1 of them asked, "Who is really in control of this board?" My mom's hands were on the planchette when she suddenly felt a sharp jerk. The other person's hands were barely touching it. The board spelled out Satan in quick, deliberate motions, and then stopped. They started arguing, with some saying my mom pushed it, while others insisted she didn't. As they were arguing, they all turned their heads to the left from where my mom was sitting. Suddenly, without anyone feeling a puff of air or anything, the candle to their right went out. It scared them so badly that they all jumped up and ran to the porch of the church across the street. It was late Sunday night after services, so the doors were locked and no one was there. They stayed on the porch, talking for a few minutes before walking back to the house. My mom never touched a Ouija board again. Please be kind here. I don't even like telling this story because I feel like no one will believe me. I'm relatively new to Reddit, but seeing others share their experiences made me finally think it might be time to share mine. Side note, my friends' names have been changed for this story as they are still together and very reluctant to ever bring it up. This must have been around 2007. One night, Two friends and I were out ghost hunting in a very remote little town in western New York. My friend Jane wanted a couple more pictures in the old cemetery, so her boyfriend and I waited in my SUV while she did her thing. It must have been around midnight, and we were parked on a back road, though there were some streetlights up ahead. Jane was behind us and off to the right, but we could still see her and her flashlight. John and I were looking up the road when, about 50 to 65 yards ahead, out from under the streetlight on the left-hand side, appeared a black figure wearing a wide-brim hat. It just appeared out of nowhere. It was blacker than black, more like a void. 100% not a person. This being had absolutely no features, but we could make out the hat in profile. It was a flat-top hat with a wide brim. On my mother's grave, it took maybe 30 steps before it morphed, the only way I can describe it, into a black cat before it reached the streetlight on the opposite side of the road and disappeared into a field. Again, you could tell it was the shape of a cat, but it was just a black void. John and I stared at each other for about 2 minutes before we could even speak. When the time came, all he could say was, "You saw that too, didn't you?" We continued to sit there in absolute awe and sheer terror. Jane came back not long after, and I couldn't even move to unlock the doors. I barely managed to move my hand just enough to hit the unlock button and let her in. She jokingly said, "You both look like you saw the devil himself." John, a huge, very tall, muscular, and intimidating guy, was shaking and in tears. All he could say was, "Cat." I tried to explain to Jane what had happened, but I struggled to even talk. It was about a 35-minute drive back home, and I can remember Jane saying things like, "This isn't funny anymore. You guys are scaring me." John insisted we take him to his church, where we both said a prayer to Mother Mary at the outdoor statue. While he continued to pray, I tried to explain to Jane what we had seen. I remember thinking how crazy I sounded. To this day, it still chills me to my core. Whatever it was, I know it was not of this earth. A part of me wants answers so badly, but then I keep thinking, maybe I'm better off not knowing exactly what it was. Jane and I lost touch over the years, but eventually reconnected. We talked about that night, as it was always the elephant in the room. She told me that after the incident, all the crosses in her mom's house would randomly turn upside down for a couple of weeks. It only stopped when Jane's mom prayed deeply and blessed the house. Jane and John were living with her at the time. Did something follow them home? I've never seen anything like that again, and I pray I never will. Thanks for letting me share here. Edit. Just days after I posted this, my cat died in my arms from a sudden medical emergency. On the exact same day, about 12 hours earlier, Jane's 8-year-old dog also died. My cat was 16, but I can't help but wonder if sharing this story somehow brought it on. First of all, English is not my first language, so bear with me. For context, I live on the 3rd floor of my apartment complex, which is right beside a small local private elementary school. I can see their playground from my window, since my apartment is at the end of the hallway and I've been disturbed by their noise during recess. Now for the story. It all started a few weeks ago when I was watching the film Longlegs with my boyfriend, who was sleeping over. If you've seen the movie, you know it involves kids, especially girls. During the movie, we heard a quick, high-pitched scream that sounded like a little girl. We stopped the movie, pretty troubled, because we both heard it, and it didn't seem to come from the direction of the laptop. We wondered if we should call the cops in case there was an actual little girl nearby in need of help. But in my block, there are no other houses or residential buildings, so we didn't know how to make sense of it. We just kept watching the movie, and only the next day did we remember the school by my building. Ever since that night, every night between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m., I hear the same female, childlike scream that lasts for about a second. Last night, my boyfriend slept over again, and we both heard the scream. I confirmed it with him, asking, "Did you hear it?" To which he said yes, and I just heard it again as I'm writing this. I swear this is true. Sometimes I can brush it off and go to sleep, but other times I get genuinely terrified. Should I be scared? Should I do anything? Maybe check with my neighbors if they've heard something like this? Talk to the school? Or should I just try to keep calm and go back to sleep? A few years ago, in the fall or early winter of 2019, we were staying with my husband's father. We rented and moved into a house a couple of months later, but at the time, we stayed there for less than a week when this happened. I was sleeping in the living room on an air mattress with our kids, ages 10, 5, and 1. The kitchen, dining room, and living room were all open space. There was a wide counter with a sink that served as a bar on the living room side, but my father-in-law never used it that way. He always had a sofa pushed right up to it, with storage for dishes and other things on the kitchen side. On each end of the counter, there was about 4 or 5 feet of open space between it and the wall. Along the wall, directly opposite the front door, were 3 doors: father-in-law's bedroom, bathroom, and spare room, from left to right. My husband slept on the tiny bed in the spare room. His dad kept his bedroom door closed and usually had a TV on, and depending on the weather, either a space heater, window AC unit, or at least one fan going. I don't remember if my husband had the door to his room open or closed that night. Except for that back wall, where the bedrooms and bathroom were, the house had windows all the way around it, large floor-to-ceiling windows along the front, and sliding windows along each side wall. The house was originally built as a sort of camp or getaway cabin, and the windows provided a great view. Apparently, my father-in-law disagreed, and he was in the process of building a front porch and replacing about half of those windows with walls. At the time, the porch was still being built, and none of the windows had been replaced yet. This particular night, I was holding my 18-month-old, with a child on each side of me. We had all been asleep for a while when I woke up. I'm not sure what time it was, but the house was mostly quiet, and no one else was awake. I lay there quietly without moving for a little while, trying to figure out why I was awake, let alone so alert. After some time, I decided it was just one of those things, maybe a sleep cycle interruption, and I was about to try to go back to sleep when I heard someone knock on the front door. It wasn't a loud banging knock, but it was definitely a knock. The air mattress was in the middle of the living room, and the door was on the kitchen side of the dividing counter. I really didn't want to answer the door for multiple reasons. I was in the middle of 3 sleeping children. It was late, it was cold, and we were cozy and warm. Plus, it wasn't my house, and no one else seemed to notice the knocking. The knocking went on longer than I would have knocked on someone's door in the middle of the night. It got more persistent, but never turned into banging, and no one called out or rang a cell phone. Finally, I heard footsteps walking down the unfinished porch. They had stacked some boards, tools, and other materials against the front of the house. While I didn't hear any clattering or thumping, it sounded like whoever was out there was walking on and around those materials. Then, I heard a distinct and firm tapping on the window closest to where the kids and I were sleeping. There was a small, older TV and a stereo on 2 small tables between the air mattress and the windows. I was facing away from the window, but the tapping was right where our heads were. It was an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, and the tapping happened only in the area that would have been in my direct line of sight if I hadn't been facing the other way. I don't think I took a single breath until the tapping stopped, and I heard footsteps walking away. Then, I heard them walking across what sounded like sheets of tin, all the way to the end of the porch, where the driveway was. Walking across tin makes a very distinct sound, and I know exactly what it sounds like. What I didn't realize until the next morning was that the only sheets of tin out there had already been put in place because they had finished putting up the roof over the porch the day before. There were no sheets of tin stored against the wall or under the windows with the other materials. The only way for someone or something to have walked across those sheets of tin, which I'm absolutely certain I heard, would have been for them to jump or swing up onto the roof from the incomplete porch floor, then jump back down at the end. It scared me in a way nothing else ever has, and it still does every time I accidentally think about it. And that's why I'm typing this right now, and probably also why an owl chose this moment to let out the most terrifying, un-owl-like sound before transitioning into its usual eerie owl calls.